Hello, my name's Gavin. This is Genre Books. A bit of a different video today. I was watching Michael K. Vaughan last week when he was talking about Canon. I thought I could possibly stick my oar into that discussion. I then saw that Steve Donoghue, who is always quick off the mark, put his own thoughts on the subject onto a video. I will link both videos of the big boys down below. This isn't a response video to theirs because by and large I agree with what they say, but I do have some thoughts, probably going to be over a couple of videos. The first video is about retcon and retconning, which is the awful term for retroactive continuity. Books, in comparison to film, television, comic books, gets away relatively lightly in terms of retroactive continuity. Not that the world of books is immune to such behaviour, but people respond with a tut rather than with death threats to showrunners, directors, companies, and even actors. But I want to take a look at some examples in literature and look at the benefits, the uses, and the pitfalls of employing retroactive continuity. The first example is a benign one, relatively speaking. Isaac Asimov's Laws of Robotics, the moral code installed into robots in Asimov's universe to basically keep them from slaughtering humanity. The laws came into the stories a little while after he had started to write them. But once the laws had been formulated, they were retroactively placed into the earlier stories. This gives one of the benefits of retroactive continuity, that of connecting stories and connecting later stories to earlier ones. The laws didn't appear until 1942, but Asimov had been writing the stories since 1940. He started writing them, I might add, shortly after Earl and Otto Binder had written some of their stories regarding Adam Link, a collection put together under the title I, Robot. But maybe stealing titles is a subject for another day. The three laws, though, belonged to Asimov, possibly from John Campbell, maybe a mix of the two. But John Campbell was happy for Asimov to take these laws and run with them. In the series of stories about the robots, these laws did not come down in one group on high, graven on a tablet. They were drip-fed into the stories slowly, but were stated in their totality at the time in 1942's Runaround. I hedge my language there slightly because much later Asimov comes up with a fourth law, which doesn't help the phrase three laws of robotics, so he calls it the 0th law. When the book I, Robot was compiled from the stories that Asimov had been writing, it was presented as though the laws had always been in place. On the retcon scale, this is a minor change. It's an understandable change. I should imagine some science fiction fans were still up in arms about it because they're very good at doing that. But I don't blame Asimov for wanting to make this more cohesive. However, 85 years later, this really doesn't impact anybody. I can't think of anyone living whose first experience of Isaac Asimov's robot stories wasn't the compiled book, rather than the stories as they appeared in the pulps to begin with. So I don't think any harm is done. I don't think it's a bad thing in that situation, and this is one of the benefits of retroactive continuity. I'll give you another example of this. An author who finds out, possibly belatedly, that they've written a hit and wants to amend things so that they can keep producing stories in that vein, not killing the goose that lays the golden egg. This is Johnston McCulley's The Mask of Zorro, or rather The Curse of Capistrano. So, renaming things also helps. In 1919, the first Zorro story, Zorro is unmasked at the end and revealed as Don Diego de la Vega. Doesn't help that everyone knows the masked vigilante's name. So, after many sales, after McCulley returns to writing the character, the mask goes back on, everybody forget that there was a big reveal. After 50 million sales of Zorro stories, I think we can forgive McCulley asking the audience to forget the reveal of the character's identity. It's an author's prerogative. I don't think I'm ever going to have an issue where an author makes retroactive continuity adjustments to their own canon of works. One set of people who really shouldn't have that authority, though they often try to exercise it, are the fans. This is not a new phenomenon. This is not an internet thing, although the internet and social media have exacerbated the noise surrounding it. Not every fan is as committed to ensuring an author engages in some retroactive continuity as Annie Wilkes from Misery, for example, but the fact that that character exists means that fans who have strong opinions were a definite known quantity before the World Wide Web. Many people these days can now voice their opinions directly to an author without hobbling them first. Or maybe they're just a bit too lazy to go and put in the extra effort. What modern fans should not think is that having a creator cave in to making a retroactive change to something is by any means a new phenomenon. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the case of the returning detective. The first Sherlock Holmes stories were produced between 1887 and 1893, but Arthur Conan Doyle felt that my literary energies should not be directed too much into one channel, and accordingly Holmes met his demise fighting Professor Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland, where they both tumble over a precipice to their deaths. Doyle gives a final, satisfying end to a very popular character. "You brute," wrote one lady to Doyle. It was not the only letter he received, but that was nothing compared to the correspondence received to him at the offices of the Strand magazine, who had been publishing the Sherlock Holmes stories. People were not happy. The Strand may have been a little bit happier. A big story like this boosts sales, and the furore it created stirs up interest. they may have thought that this is a good thing, at least in the short term. What they were possibly unprepared for was a snowballing effect of cancellations of subscriptions to the Strand, and I think they had something like 20,000 cancellations. Doyle does seem to have stood his ground, at least for a while. Maybe he was busy writing the other things he wanted to do. Maybe he felt he wanted to return to the character himself. Maybe the Strand magazine were exercising a little coercion because they knew that the return of Sherlock Holmes would be possibly a bigger story than his death. Even when Holmes does come back in 1901's The Hound of the Baskervilles, it's not retroactive continuity because the story takes place at a point before he died. The character can still be dead and you can still make Sherlock Holmes stories. But in 1903, with The Adventure of the Empty House, we see the first new Sherlock Holmes story set in a time after he had apparently died. It wasn't all a dream, but it was faked. Sherlock Holmes had faked his death to fool his enemies. And we'll set aside the fact that he fooled and traumatised Dr. Watson in the process. Sherlock Holmes was back, and Doyle would continue to write Holmes stories until 1927. Resurrection can be an easy thing to put onto paper, but it's a bit more difficult to ask a readership to swallow it, especially if it stretches the bounds of believability. There is a subtler issue here, and one of the things which I think retroactive continuity has created that is a detriment to our experience of reading in the first place. And that is the feeling that we now have when we see the deaths of fictional characters, that death may not be the end. There is the term comic book death, and you can see this at play in both the books and actually in the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well. There are many ways of bringing a character back, but we have seen fan favourites such as Killmonger, or Loki, or Gamora, Vision, anyone that perished in Thanos' snap return. You are never assured to rest in peace as a character if you are in the comic book universe. Except perhaps for Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. Sorry Ben, you stay dead, you need to for narrative purposes. Resurrection, when used sparingly, might not impact believability amongst your audience too much. It seems to have worked okay for Christianity, but if you overuse it, what the harm you cause is a loss of narrative tension, a loss of emotional response from the reader to a character's death when in the back of their mind they know that character might be coming back. In cinema, this could possibly be glossed over by the quick introduction of even bigger explosions and spectacle. Something a bit more difficult to pull off on the page. In a universe full of parallel universes, time travel and magic gloves, there are just too many routes back from canonical death. Sometimes a change needs to be made just for things to make sense. In The Hobbit, Gollum loses the One Ring to Bilbo in a game of riddles. That this happens can't really be reconciled to Gollum's character as we know it in The Lord of the Rings. he's not willingly going to part with the ring. If we know nothing about their character, we know this. We know the power the ring has over the people that possess it. The ring isn't going to want to allow this to happen unless they choose to. But maybe here the person doing the retroactive continuity is Bilbo, whose narrative we are relying on, his there and back again tale. Sometimes a change is just made. There was no narrative need for it to happen. An author just decides they want to. I'm not a Harry Potter reader, so I don't know whether making the character of Dumbledore gay has any narrative implications. I don't know if this is just J.K. Rowling giving the Hogwarts universe some LGBTQ plus representation, but it went down very well amongst that community who felt they had some representation. Now, I've not been keeping up with the news for the last 5 years, so I can imagine that J.K. Rowling has remained a darling of the LGBTQ plus community on the basis of this behaviour. Retroactive continuity is not going to please everyone, but I think we can see it does have its uses, but it raises the question of what is canon? Who can make the canonical changes? If you tell me that everything was just a dream, can I accept that? How does it change the way I will feel about things next time? Will I shrug off a character death because I know that they can be brought back? And if I really don't like it, what do I do? Do I pen a strongly worded letter? Do I call the author a brute? Do I throw my toys out of my pram publicly and to no discernible purpose on social media? And do the publishers or the film studios, TV companies or streaming companies even care? Possibly they don't. It's unlikely. They know that the blame will just be put on those most visible, the writers, the showrunners, the actors. And they perhaps feel that people aren't going to unsubscribe from streaming services in the numbers that they did with the Strand magazine. Should any of us get that exercised about it anyway? No. But the problem is we seem to be more exercised about the fictional worlds rather than actual reality, which we just treat with a shrug of the shoulders. We have public figures, political leaders who will tell us that photoshopped images are real. Up is down, black is white. Ukraine started a war with Russia, and we have always been at war with Eurasia, and East Asia is our ally. And in the grand scheme of things, retroactive continuity in fiction is not that big a deal. Pick your battles. Don't sweat the small stuff. And if you still feel that strongly about it, you can always go to write some fan fiction, which I would suggest would not be canonical, but would make you feel better. Until next time.